Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Rebel Talk podcast. I'm your host, Zach Moreth. As always, I'm here with your co-host, Daylan Flowers. It is the evening of December 12th. The Ole Miss football schedule was released last night at 6 p.m. So to start off, we're going to give you guys, kind of our predictions, our takes, and then we'll wrap up the podcast with obviously the commitment of Deshaun Womack from LSU, along with PJ Wilkins from the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. The first two commits out of the transfer portal for Ole Miss, along with some names to look out for. We'll give you guys all that information. Be sure to like and subscribe. Like I said, we're going to start with the schedule here. Ole Miss has 8 home games and 4 away games, including a very difficult 6-game stretch here in the middle of the season, and a week 2 matchup at Kentucky. So you're looking for a revenge matchup there, ultimately for the team that ruined your season in 2024. But I do enjoy the fact that we're playing an SEC team in week 2 rather than Middle Tennessee State. What are your thoughts on that, Dylan?
I love the schedule, man. I'm very excited about it. I think it's kind of a beacon of what the 2023 schedule is like. That year, we obviously set an 11-win record for this program. Played at Tulane at home, played against a really good Georgia Tech team. I love the schedule. I think that it's competitive right off the bat. I think that Georgia State is obviously not one of those top tier teams in the country, but I think that that's a team that's still built up a pretty decent reputation over the last few years in terms of building success. And you start off, like you said, week 2 going into Lexington to hopefully get a little bit of revenge from this past season. So I love it. You get right into conference play, and in the midst of that, you play Fayetteville, which is I think for me, and I kind of talked about this when we had the Fayetteville game a few weeks ago, about a little over a month ago, but it's kind of that rivalry game. I think for myself included, just for both teams, they kind of started as kind of being the rival for each other. And then we get Tulane at home, which is Tulane is built a great reputation over the last few years. Cotton Bowl a couple seasons ago, really close to winning a conference championship this past year. And so Tulane's obviously one of those formidable teams that have a good chance, and I'm sure if they continue to work well in the portal, they will make the have a chance of making the playoff next year. So I love our schedule. You talked about the brutal kind of midst of games in October, and for people that have not seen the schedule or are not really reminiscent of it or looking at it right now, we have Washington State and Oxford, which was the game that was picked up for Ole Miss after Wake Forest decided not to come to Oxford this year. Then we go to Athens, Georgia to play the Bulldogs and Kirby Smart. And then we go to Oklahoma and play the Sooners in Norman. Those are 2 really marquee games. Obviously, Georgia is, I would say, the standard for what college football is, and they're going to come in next year probably revamping a lot based on how well this season goes for them. So I expect that to be a high potent game, but expect a lot of new faces on both sides of the ball, honestly, for both teams. And then at Oklahoma, I mean, I know Brent Venables in the squad for Oklahoma didn't have the year that they wanted this year, but that was due to a lot of different things. And I think that Brent has kind of kept his head on high this season, and I still think the program at Oklahoma is backing him really well. And I think this offseason is going to be a true test of how good Brent Venables can really recruit. So we'll see, but I still think that Oklahoma is going to be a pretty good team next year. Gaylord is not an easy place to win. They have a lot of history there, and any scenario the Oklahoma team can give anybody run for their money. I mean, this year we saw Alabama go down there. Who for an Alabama team that went to LSU and dominated LSU in Baton Rouge, they lose by 21 points in Norman. So that's going to be a game, kind of just early spring will maybe be a little bit of a trap game, for might say. But I love the schedule, Zach. I really do. It like you talked about, it goes right into conference play in the second week of the season. There's a lot of depth and fluidity throughout the season, and just for Ole Miss fans in general, you get a lot more opportunities to be at Vaught Hemingway this year. And I think this year has also been an excelled role in terms of the stadium atmosphere and the stadium atmosphere growing. And so I think that's definitely going to be a benefit for people that are Ole Miss fans.
Yeah, spot on, Dalen. And that road stretch going to Georgia and then Oklahoma, and then you come home to South Carolina, probably the most difficult stretch of the entire season there. Just looking at that first half, at Kentucky, Arkansas, Tulane, LSU, that's the first kind of SEC stretch, along with Tulane, who's a very competitive team, like we said. And this is where you basically make or break the season, because you can drop a game to Arkansas. We've seen that happen in the past. And then LSU is always seemingly a shootout that always comes down to the wire. At least it has been for the last 2 years. So if you can start at 1, 2, 3, 4, your first 5 games, if you can get to 5-0 and then win against Washington State to go 6-0 at Georgia, you're looking at a marquee matchup, a really competitive matchup, in a game where I don't want to say you can afford to lose, but losing to Georgia looks a lot better than losing to Arkansas, Tulane, LSU, or Kentucky. So I would like that first loss to come against Georgia if there is a first loss, which we can imagine there are going to be some losses in this season. But I think all the fans have to remember that, none of these games you can take for granted. In this current state of college football and the transfer portal, NIL, every team's going to be competitive enough to beat you. I don't care if you're 24.5-point favorites, 3-score favorites. You look at what happened at Florida for Ole Miss this year, and then obviously what happened against Kentucky. There's no room, really margin for error in a lot of these games. So it's going to be important for Kiffin to get this transfer portal class finished up with here in the next couple of weeks, maybe get a couple more guys in the spring cycle. But at the end of the day, when September rolls around, you're going to Lexington, Kentucky to face a team that you lost to last year. So you got to be ready to go and foot on the gas the entire way. As a hopeful, optimistic Ole Miss fan, early, I see this going in a similar 10-2/9-3 direction. I think Ole Miss loses on the road to Georgia. I think the Bulldogs are going to be fired up after dropping one in Oxford this year. And I also think you're going to lose either against LSU, Florida, or South Carolina, or potentially 2 of those games, which it's not something I want to say. But you look at, Lenore Sellers, DJ Lagway, Garrett Nussmeier's coming back. Those are highly touted quarterbacks who are going to be able to handle some road pressure in a crazy SEC environment and definitely knock off Ole Miss, which, could have a lot of young players on the defensive and offensive side of the football. So I'm hoping, maybe 10-2 or 9-3, but I also want to, kind of recall on the fact that we could be looking at a 14-team playoff. I know nothing's been official, but, if you watch some of these interviews with Keith Carter and you listen to the way Greg Sankey, the SEC commissioner, talks about the college football playoffs, they want more SEC teams in there. SEC teams are not only, in my opinion, the best in the country, but they bring in revenue and views. In the football in the South is just a little bit different. And I think it's something that's going to be missed in this set of college football playoffs. And I think it's something that will be changed moving forward into 2025. But all in all, there isn't a game on the schedule that I don't think Ole Miss can't win, which is a good thing to say as a student. The team has all the potential in the world. You got Austin Simmons. You're looking at a couple of these portal guys starting to come in. You got some really good high school freshmen who have a chance to play, like Caleb Cunningham and Shakai Mills-Knight. And if you want to get to the playoffs, you have to win some of these close games. And it's exciting. I think having the chance to really prepare your fall camp as if it's fall camp versus this year, we have 4 games or we're kind of going to mess around and try a few new things. Like, no, that's not the case. Like when fall camp goes around, the guys got to be ready to go and ultimately locked in for the Georgia State game because you got Kentucky, Arkansas, Tulane, and LSU right behind it. So I do enjoy that. I think the 6-game stretch is difficult, but, you got the Citadel in there on November 8th, right before Florida week. So not that that's obviously it's not a bye week. The players are going to play, but you'd expect Ole Miss to compete really well against the Citadel and put them away early and get their guys a little more rest that week. But that's really all I got in terms of the schedule, Daylan. If you want to add anything else, feel free.
Yeah, you bring up a few good points that I kind of want to just yap about really quick. You talked about the SEC teams and the money and the revenue and the viewership they bring in. There was a list that was brought out today that I saw. It was like the top 10 teams that had the most views throughout all the teams in the country, and 8 of those teams were from the SEC. The other 2 were Ohio State and Michigan. So your point is factual, like it's based off just straight facts, and so that's a great point that you kind of just talked about, and I'm sure that people will hopefully look at in terms of if we keep a 12-team committee, if we move to 14, like you talked about, and then you also bring up a great point that I'm so glad you brought up about because we go to Kentucky. Brock Vandagriff will be back. We face Arkansas. Taylor Green announced today that he will be back. Tulane is in the midst of a quarterback situation, but I trust what Tulane does, and they've done a really good job over the past couple of years. Even in the regards of coaching changes, I still think they'll get a really good quarterback. You say Garrett Nussmeier will be back, another good quarterback. Obviously, Georgia will more than Carson Beck is probably going to be gone, but Gunnar Stockton showed what he can do in the championship game. So that's going to be another great quarterback. Lenore Sellers had a great freshman year this year. And then you talked about DJ Lagway and even in the season, Mississippi State. I mean, this is still, we're recording this before anything happens, but I wouldn't be surprised if Jackson Arnold goes down to Starkville and at least highly thinks about rejoining with Jeff Levy. So next year is going to be a battle for these teams in terms of facing quarterbacks that are really good, quarterbacks that have experience and have talent. So that's, for me, that's exciting. But it's as we go into talking about the transfer portal a little bit, I wonder how Pete Golding and his staff on the defensive side of the ball are kind of looking at what we need to target in terms of some secondary guys or even some linebackers in QB spy, a couple guys that may be runners like DJ and Taylon Green and Lenore Sellers on, we kind of talked about this throughout the season, but this Ole Miss defense was great, one of the best defenses in the country, but the secondary was a little questionable a lot of times throughout the season. So expect Pete Golding, to obviously do what he does in the transfer portal, which has already started on that side of the ball, but expect him to target a few guys in the secondary really well because we're losing Trey Amos, we're losing John Saunders Jr., we're losing Trey Washington, we're losing guys that have been here, experienced, even guys that came in this year for transfer portal and had a lot of talent and showed that this year. They're going to be gone. And so expect Pete to look at this and say, okay, we're facing a lot of great quarterbacks next year. And what was weird about 2024, especially the SEC, Zach, the quarterback play there was a lot of good guys, but there was no real consistency from game one to the final game of the regular season in terms of a quarterback. You even look at Jackson Dart, the Ole Miss quarterback. He finished first team All SEC. But just being honest, Jackson had some games throughout the season, whether that was through the injury or just in general that, you kind of thought was his thought process in doing some of the things he was doing on the field. So this year it was kind of like, I would say, no true consistency from one quarterback throughout the whole SEC. Expect that next year, and I say that because, again, Brock Vandagriff came in, showed a lot of heart, especially against Ole Miss this year. I think Mike Stoops is going to help get a lot of talent around him that will help benefit him more. He's going to have another year of experience on his belt. Same thing with Taylon Green and under Bobby Petrino. These guys that I'm talking about, a lot of them are, come in as freshmen this year or, transfers, and now they're truly had a year under their belt in this conference, understand what their system is at their respective schools. Now expect them to be elevated even more. So watch for what Pete Golding does in the portal right now, and, in terms of who we can bring in to shut guys down like that. And I'm excited because, that for me is just I think that's going to be, TV revenue for us. That's hopefully we get a night game this year instead of not getting a night conference game this year. And that may benefit because we're now facing a few teams that have some really good quarterback play from any school, especially in this conference meetings. Most players are going to try to transfer to a couple of those schools. So it should be a fun time for us.
It's going to be awesome, Daylan. And, you mentioned the transfer portal. A couple guys I want to hit on before we talk about these commits. Marcellus Barnes from Syracuse has entered the transfer portal. 6'1", really lengthy defensive back, and he's going into his true sophomore year last year. And who's making his decision? He was between Ole Miss, Georgia, and Syracuse. Ended up going to Syracuse, but now that he's in the portal, you can expect Pete Golding to really pursue him and try and get him, especially, losing all that talent in the secondary and going against so many competitive SEC quarterbacks like Daylan was talking about. The second cornerback I want to talk about is Jalen Braxton. He is, he has the potential to be DB1, quite honestly. He was a freshman all honorable mention in 2023 with Arkansas. He told On3 that he had a great visit with Ole Miss. He was wrapping up today. So that's another guy to keep your eyes out for. I believe he may be taking a few more visits. Yeah. Definitely a good first impression with Ole Miss. And now, diving into one of the position groups who is losing probably 4 or 5 NFL picks in the first 3 rounds is the defensive line, and Deshaun Womack from LSU, who committed to the Rebels this morning, actually, Dylan. I woke up and checked my phone, and it was a beautiful morning, man. I had no idea. Miss Evie texted me, shout out to Evie, that he committed, and that's the first commit out of the transfer portal. This is a former 5-star in the 2023 class. He's got 2 years of eligibility, 6'5", 250 pounds, just a freak athlete. Daylan, your thoughts on Deshaun Womack and his impact in Pete Golding's defense?
Super excited, and a guy that can kind of play on the edge like Sunterian Perkins, which will help him out a lot as well, especially on those third and shorts. But he plays like Sunterian, but he has a little bit more size than Sunterian, and Sunterian's a lot quicker, but this dude's a little bit more built than Sunterian. So it brings me a good bit of joy. He obviously didn't put up great numbers this past year at LSU, but watching LSU, I honestly don't believe he was given that much of a chance in terms of the consistent opportunities that he was probably looking for. And his game style fits exactly how I watch Pete Golding, coach his defense. And so you're going to see a lot of aggressiveness from this guy. This guy plays with his head down, is really aggressive, just loves to play defense. He loves to put guys in the ground and make tackles and make big plays. And so I'm excited that this guy is joining Ole Miss. He's one of those guys that you kind of dislike when they're on your other team, but you love when they're on your team. So, watching the film of him, just an athletic guy, freak of nature, really good tackle for loss guy. Something that I think that we had talked about around maybe the Arkansas game, the Georgia game, is finishing sacks, and how big that the defense was doing. Kind of poorly at that time, but they got a lot better throughout the end of the season. Deshaun is a guy that will finish sacks, and that gives me great happiness when, like I said, on those third downs, when we really need a play that maybe the offense of the opposing team is on the 50-yard line and we want to send them back so they can, get a good punter, et cetera, et cetera. I'm excited about Deshaun. I really am. Coming from LSU, an experienced guy, and like you said, a 5-star coming out of high school, that right there screams volumes. And so be able to get him right now was really cool. Like you said, I woke up and heard the noise. And you bring up a point about Marcellus from Syracuse. He was talking about Syracuse, Georgia, Ole Miss. Think about this in a way, Zach, and people watching and listening. Obviously, I wish Ole Miss were in the playoffs right now. But think about it in terms of preparing for next year now. Now then, we're not in the playoffs. We're preparing for the Gator Bowl, but Georgia is putting all their marbles in it this season right now. They're focused on this playoffs, while Ole Miss is obviously focused on Duke and the Gator Bowl, but we have so much returning talent and guys that have already opted into playing into that. I think that it's given the staff a little more freedom to kind of roam around in the transfer portal right now and kind of contact guys compared to Georgia, who's worried about the playoff right now. So expect Marcellus to hopefully commit to Ole Miss very soon, and a few other guys that may be looking at some of these teams that are in the playoffs, but also looking at Ole Miss. But given the circumstances, the staff is kind of already able to contact them. I'm not saying, because I don't know this, but I'm not saying that, Georgia's not able to contact them. I'm sure they obviously are, but they may be a little bit more hesitant because they're trying to focus on winning a national championship, while we kind of have our thoughts on a few different things as well.
It's a great point you bring up, Daylan. And, you can sit here and there's no doubt, right? Georgia has their recruiting department, their GM, their version of Billy Glasscock and all those guys here at Ole Miss.
Yeah.
But there is 100% a level of difference between playing a Duke team who has lost their quarterback and their backup quarterback to the transfer portal.
Yep.
Versus being in the college football playoffs and waiting to prepare to see who you're playing in the second round. There's undoubtedly a difference. And, I hope to God that you're going to see that with the results of Ole Miss, who usually do a nice job cleaning up the portal and establishing a roster for next year. We're going to stay on the defensive side of the ball here, and actually, stay a little interconnected to this 2024 squad and talk about Princewill Uman-Mielen, actually the brother of Princely Uman-Mielen, who didn't know. Very similar names, so should be an easy one to remember. And then you look at their structure and their frame, and they're very similar players. Princewill is 6'5", 250 pounds, the perfect NFL candidate type prospect, edge rusher. We saw him drop a lot in coverage at Nebraska. And when you look at, analysts like Lou Spano and, these defensive line coaches, Randall Joyner, Pete Golding, they are very aggressive with their edge rushers. So you can expect Princewill. I believe he hasn't gotten a lot of sacks in his career. That's something that is simply going to increase if he ends up committing to Ole Miss. He has been on campus throughout the week. Obviously, Princely is basically been developed into a first-round pick, if not an early second-round pick here. So, in my opinion, Daylan, the momentum is trending in the right way here with Princewell.
Yeah, the number 4 target in the transfer portal right now. I think like the number 1 defensive end right now. Kid is a dog, and like you said, I love this kid because you kind of just talk about, and even with Deshaun, numbers wise, someone that doesn't watch the game or someone that has not watched a lot about a specific player may not think, oh, this guy's really good. But watching him, I see a lot of potential, and which builds on with the right system, around the right players, and around the good enough amount of depth. This guy can be a really great and elite talent. And like you talked about, which I thought was a great point, Zach, he drops back a lot in coverage. And for me, I watched Chris Paul do that a lot this season. And I was just really astounded how good he was at jamming the line of scrimmage and getting in the backfield, but as well dropping back into coverage when needed. And Kari Coleman came in and played a lot of that role this season too, which I thought he did an excellent job at this season as well. So I love Princewell for that motion as well, because sometimes we will run a lot of zone coverage, especially on the second and long or first and long, and it works out sometimes, but you kind of look at it in the motion as well. We watched Jackson Arnold kind of run crazy across this against this defense in the first half when we played Oklahoma. Even Brock Verniger had a couple of strong runs this season, so that kind of gives me a bit of essence for a guy that can maybe close off some slants that are coming down the middle of the field, or maybe stop a running back from getting open when he's trying to make a receiving play. I love Princewell just from a film perspective, and hopefully, and I know Texas A&M is really trying to make their marks on getting him to College Station and committed there. So that will be the one team that I think Ole Miss is in definite competition with in terms of getting Umami Yellen. But I'm excited, hopefully that Princely will put a little good word in. I'm sure he already has. So that's obviously going to be up to Princewell. But I hope this kid, we take a really good chance on him, and we just have a good conversation with him, and he comes to Oxford, man. Because my thing is, and I say this a lot when I'm with Stephen Willis, and if people that are kind of new to myself, I always say that if we get him to Oxford, most times we keep him here. And so I have a good feeling if we get him down for a good visit and a good conversation and a true understanding of what this program is, then he won't leave, and he'll stay here as a Rebel. So we'll keep you guys updated with Princewell, but hopefully we get that commitment here soon and get it done quickly, and he will be an Ole Miss Rebel.
That's exactly what Ole Miss is great at, Daylan. Getting these transfer guys here on visits, discussing NIL, showing them around the Manning Center, and ultimately these guys end up committing relatively quickly. So you're looking for a similar situation here with Princewell and hoping that's the case. Flipping on the offensive side of the ball here, I'm going to start out wide. Eric Singleton from Georgia Tech, he was their leading wide receiver. He's rumored to be visiting Ole Miss this weekend. 5'11", 6-foot type guy. He can do a little bit of everything. He can play outside receiver like Jordan Watkins. He can be the Swiss Army knife that you need in the slot, motioning around, all around. And when you're losing Watkins, Harris, Juice Wells, even the tight end who's very effective, Caden Prescorn in the passing game, you need guys to make up that production. And Singleton would be a great start. I believe he'll be visiting this weekend. And then moving up front here, Patrick Kudas from Arkansas. He's a 6'5", 315 interior offensive lineman. He has been in Oxford, I believe, this week, potentially today earlier. We haven't gotten a commitment from him yet, and that's something you're going to have to keep your eyes out for. He may be checking out Alabama. You probably don't want him to leave Oxford this week without a commitment, because, when that happens in the transfer portal, that usually means they're focused on a different school. But definitely a guy you want to keep your eyes out for. He's a big-time player, and he would come here and he would start, no question. And then I want to move into finally the commitment, Daylan, from PJ Wilkins from Charlotte. We mentioned him earlier. 6'6", 340. These are numbers that you like to hear if you're offensive line coach John Garrison, or if you're a fan of Ole Miss. And the thing I believe, Wilkins brings is an incredible run blocking ability, which Ole Miss simply didn't have this year. If you look at, the guards in the center, there was rarely a good push to allow Bentley, or really whoever was in the running back spot, to try and maneuver around some gaps and find some space. But with a guy like PJ Wilkins, that's entirely possible. He is a good pass blocker, but to me, getting that push in the run game is going to be really crucial to establish an offense for Austin Simmons next season. So just your thoughts on PJ and, so far the transfer portal for Ole Miss, Daylan.
I like PJ. Obviously good size, 6'7", I think like 355, 360 in that range, if I'm not mistaken. It's kind of weird with offensive linemen that are like that. We kind of watched Diego Pounds this year and even Michael Pettis, who I think were great locker room guys. And I mean, no disrespect when I say this, I think that they definitely could have improved their skills, especially in terms of maybe just footwork and hand placement in a lot of games. I think PJ will come in, and we just have to work with him a lot with that. Obviously that's a good size offensive line to have, offensive lineman to have. But how good can he work in the trenches? Can he not hold a lot of times when the quarterback has to escape out the pocket and make a throw downfield? So those are going to be keys for me that I'm looking for PJ. I'll be honest, I haven't really watched too much of PJ yet, but I'm sure that he will come in. And John Garrison, I think you brought this up to me a few weeks ago, but John Garrison has a little bit of a chip on his shoulder, and this is just my opinion. But yeah, this is just our opinion. But like Zach said, the offensive line was kind of questionable throughout the whole season. You kind of watched it last year up until that. Really, when conference play started last year, the offensive line was trenchful, honestly. And even in the second half of that Alabama game, we still didn't look too well. And then after that LSU game, I thought I saw a lot of pickup. But John Garrison has a chip on his shoulder. And you brought up Patrick Kudish as well, a guy that is from Memphis, has great ties to the Christian Brothers Academy in Memphis, and Christian Brothers is a great tie to Ole Miss. So expect John Garrison to go after this guy really hard. I love him. I've watched him a lot, obviously, with my Arkansas ties, and I think he has a lot of great intangibles for a guy that can make it in the NFL one day. So hopefully we get him down to Oxford, and we get him down, we keep him. But I really think John Garrison can't just go after guys that are big names, and I don't think that's what he's doing this year instead of what he's done in prior years here. But he actually has to get guys that fit his system, fit what this offense are trying to do, and guys that can really do different things well instead of maybe all guys that do the same thing well. Because, I watched guys on this offensive line this year, and I just watched a lot of things that I've seen guys that have too much experience in this conference or in general in college football that shouldn't be doing. And obviously you're going to make mistakes. They're all human. I'm not expecting them not to have a mistake, but it was just consistent from the first game of the season to the last game of the season. And I watched the same thing kind of over and over again, minus a few games. And, this is the SEC, and, we talked about it last year that Georgia lost. How do we get better in the trenches? We got better in the trenches on the defensive side this year. And, honestly, we got better on the offensive line. It just never kind of pieced together this year. So how do we consistently get better on the trenches of the offensive line this year, which will allow, obviously, to work better? Because this Ole Miss team offensively, Zach, they run better when they have they run smoothly when they have an effective run game. And we don't have that, and we're passing the ball 35 to 40 times a game. It will work on occasion, but consistently, it's not going to work. You become one-dimensional teams that have athletic guys, have freaks of natures. They watch film. They scheme around these films, and it's going to be able to be stopped against superior teams. So getting a significant offensive line is going to be huge. And you bring up Eric Singleton, obviously losing so much in the receiving room this year. Expecting Caden Lee to come back and Aiden Williams to obviously come back and hopefully see more of him. I love Eric. He's not just a huge freak of nature like, a A.J. Brown type of guy, but I kind of reminisce him as like Arian Smith, just a quick guy, good hands, really good route runner, can make plays deep down the field when needed as well. The number one player in the portal right now. And, when Lane Kiffin has kind of developed being the portal king for a reason. And so expect this guy to understand what he's looking for in the program, because, you don't just leave Georgia Tech to not know what you're looking for, but expect Lane to also understand the situation of what we need for the upcoming year, and expect Austin Simmons to have great ties in helping recruit guys like Eric Singleton to come join him next year, because Austin has a great key in recruiting. He's kind of a low-key, mellow guy, but he's a really good recruiter, and I think that's kind of something that's already being shown really quickly. So expect Eric to hopefully become a Rebel really soon, man. I think that'll obviously quick base to what the standard of what the next 2 years is going to look like for us.
That's the hope, Daylan. And, I want to touch on one last thing before we wrap up here is, this 2024 season was probably one of the only years at Ole Miss, if the only year, that Lane Kiffin couldn't run the ball.
Yeah.
And his offense simply doesn't really work when you can't run the ball. When Quinshon Judkins was here, the dude was getting, 25, 30 carries a game, pounding the rock with him. And, they were not able to do that at all. And I think it not only hindered getting, obviously, yards on the ground, but it kind of dismantled the entire passing attack as well, which is made through RPOs and play action and all these different types of movements, which weren't really possible. So the offensive line is going to be crucial. It's a great start with PJ Wilkins, who is actually the nephew of NBA legend Dominique Wilkins. Fun fact for those who didn't know. Be sure to stay tuned with us. We got a lot more transfer portal content coming your way. As we get closer, to spring ball and back into Ole Miss football, we'll dissect the schedule a little more, but that was kind of our early takes at it. That's all I got for you guys today. Daylan, you got anything else, man?
Yeah, you bring up a great point that I kind of just want to end on for Ole Miss fans kind of watching and thinking about moving forward. Think about this, especially in the run game that we're talking about in the offensive line we're talking about. J.J. Pegues will be gone this next year. And that was a good piece of the 4th and 1, 3rd and 1 red zone efficiency that we had in terms of the running game for the 2024 season is going to be gone. We don't have that option anymore after this year. So effectively now we have to find guys that can effectively help Logan Diggs next year. How can we spread those gaps open for guys like Logan Diggs and whoever we kind of Chicago Mill tonight to fill in those roles in the running back room to help them in the red zone or on 4th and 1 and 3rd and 1. So look for that, and then the transfer supporter for Ole Miss. And like Zach said, we'll keep you guys updated as time goes forward.
Last thing, Ahmad Hardy, who's a running back who rushed for over 1,000 yards at ULM. He was at Ole Miss today. He posted about it on Twitter. So whether he's going to commit or take another visit, we'll keep you guys posted with all that content at therebelwalk.com. We appreciate you guys listening. As always, stay tuned. We got some more content coming next week. More transfer portal content, like I said. Be sure to like and subscribe as always. And Daylan, anything else, man?
No, man. Howdy, y'all. Happy holidays.
Howdy, toddy. Thanks for listening, guys.